Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 5, Episode 8. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. Four nations face off in what used to be called the Canada Cup. I have my buddy John on the podcast to break down the championship game between the United States of America and Canada. Spoiler alert, the U.S. falls again. Canada once again is the champion, and I will break it all down with my buddy John. Thank you all for listening. For those of you who have come back week after week, I really do appreciate you. If you're new to the podcast, please like, subscribe, thumbs up, 5-star, write a review, send to friends and enemies far and wide. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. Please consider supporting.
Act 1. Two idiots discuss sports. Four Nations Face Off Edition.
Back on the podcast to discuss hockey, one John Caesar, and a special episode to discuss the Four Nations Face Off, a long overdue tournament. For those of you who do not know, it was an insult that you didn't watch it because the Four Nations tournament was an introduction back into what John and I experienced as young men when they used to have what they called the Canada Cup, where all these different nations, their national teams would come and play not by the Olympic rules, but by the Canadian rules. True original hockey rules. Smaller rinks, faster, more violent. It was a pleasure to see that reintroduced back into the culture, was it not, John?
Yes, it was, because at the upcoming Olympics, they will be back to an Olympic-sized rink, I assume, which changes the dynamics of the whole thing. But it was awesome. It was something that we really needed. There's so much drama amongst sports these days, and people accusing this ref and that ref of cheating, and we can dive into that later about people's lack of participatory efforts in some of these things, namely the NBA and, players sitting out. And then, we have the whole college issue where players sit out for bowl games. This was anything but that. This is where everyone wanted to play and wanted to play for their country. And man, is that a whole different ball of wax when you're playing for your country as compared to your team, isn't it?
Truly. And as a Boston Bruins fan, you had a casualty as part of this tournament, being that you had one of the players, one of the key players on the Bruins, get hurt. I believe it was in the second game against Canada, or was it in the first game? But you had a player on your team get hurt, and he's probably out for the rest of the year, no?
Yeah, old Charlie McAvoy had a great game. Of course, he had the big hit on McDavid, big hip check against the wall there in the first game. And then he was already dinged up. And then, allegedly all that goes away when you're playing for your country. But we saw that kind of fizzle out for a few of our players. But he in the second game against Finland, I think, it was either Finland or Sweden, but he got kind of nudged into the net uncomfortably. And he has an actual infection in his shoulder. So he's most likely out the rest of the year. So he had some issues with that shoulder, and he had an actual infection that had to get worked on. He actually had to stay in the hospital for a day or two. But he was able to be back for the final game. He just couldn't play.
Well, that is reminiscent of what you and I remember from the 80s in the NBA All-Star Game, the 80s in Major League Baseball. The Major League Baseball All-Star Game used to be that kind of a big deal. And certainly you saw that in the early and mid-90s for those Canada Cup tournaments. I can remember one of the issues that NHL GMs were debating was how intense that tournament was and how many of the stars of these NHL teams would come back in much worse condition than when they left. And they're thinking to themselves, hey, we're trying to make a run for the playoffs. We're trying to make a run for the Stanley Cup. And here's this in-season tournament where these guys are playing harder for their national team, as one would expect when you're playing for your country, than they are for our team. and they're beat to hell and we still have to pay them. That was present in this tournament, was it not?
Yeah, the Players Association, I don't know how crazy they are about this whole thing, but it does bring a lot of eyeballs. You had over 10 million people watch in North America, well over 10 million watch each of the two games. So it's just a massive audience. But yeah, I mean, Charlie McAvoy's out for the year. Matthew Tkachuk got hurt. Shame. Would we have won if we had him in America? Hard to say. His brother had the flu, so he's battling that. Austin Matthews was not 100%. I don't care what anybody says.
I agree.
He never looked good. He didn't have his wheels the whole tournament. And then Quinn Hughes wanted to come play with Jack Hughes. Quinn Hughes, who plays for Vancouver, but he had an oblique injury. So some of even our reserve guys couldn't make it. But, all in all, these guys played hard. I mean, they tried to put the injuries aside, but you could see some of them just couldn't go. And it was really strange, the Matthew Tkachuk thing, because they brought him out for the last championship game, but I could have told you there's no way with a groin injury. I've had plenty of those playing hockey. You can't go. So it's almost like we were sort of down a guy on our best line. It's just a lot of things didn't bounce America's way in that last game. But overall, I think it was a great event, great for hockey, a good precursor for the Olympics coming up. But certainly no love lost there, as you could tell in that first game.
Not at all. And the intensity in the tournament is what you were referencing earlier on in the podcast. It's what's lacking in a lot of sport today, whether it be these referees or officials that the leagues probably aren't investing enough money in to train them up well enough in a 21st century camera-driven game. Every single sport now has 10,000 cameras on every angle that you could possibly imagine, and they've all got replay. So you need to have the most efficient, the best officials that you've ever had, and certainly they don't. You've got players that, you mentioned the NBA, at best have a laissez-faire attitude about whether or not they ever make the court because their contracts are guaranteed, and they really don't seem to care about not only their team chemistry, but their relationship with the fans. And that was not what you saw in this tournament. I mean, everybody was playing hard. You had a significant youth movement, which I want to talk about, and we might as well just address that now. Canada had some amazing Hall of Fame players on their team, and they were, I don't want to say they were lackluster, but the Sidney Crosbys of the world are basically Larry Bird playing on the Dream Team in the Olympics in 1992. They don't have the wheels anymore. They don't have the strength anymore, the stamina. They're great figureheads, and yes, you want to put them out on the ice. They still deserve to be there because of their experience. But given the speed of that tournament and how hard the hitting was, it was a young man's tournament, was it not?
Yeah, and I tell you, I think it was a shame that Russia wasn't there. I don't know if that's because of, the war they're in. There's probably some political things going on. I mean, one way to stir the pot is to boo someone's anthem. So if you want to stir the pot and get some people pissed off and coming hard out of the gate, we saw what happened there. So I think it would have been a little more dynamic if Russia could have been there, Czechoslovakia, Switzerland, whatever. But yeah, I mean, the skill certainly goes to Canada in this. They've got the best. It was America was far outmatched the U.S. in terms of skill, but you could just see team defense was much stronger for the U.S. until it mattered in that overtime. But their systems were better because those guys all came up playing in the developmental league. So Canada doesn't have anything like that. So they have a more fractured means of just throwing everybody together because a lot of their players leave to come to the U.S. to play juniors and college and things like that. Ours are all playing with each other from the time they're little kids growing up in the U.S. Developmental League. So that's where that team systems I really thought it was going to equate to a victory for us, but the U.S. got a sloppy in that overtime. We're trying to just play run and gun. And the second I saw them doing that, I'm like, you guys need to play like you did in that third period in the game you won, and you'll win. And they just didn't do it. So, but, I guess it's a learning experience. But, the U.S., you just can't keep losing. You lost that, the last Olympics. You lost this. You should have won, period. You got the best goalie in the world right now. You should have won. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, there are several comments that I want to make just for the listeners who weren't aware of what happened in the first game between the United States and Canada. That game was played in Montreal. Montreal, Quebec is a unique place. Even though it's in Canada, the Quebec territory has its own territorial bias against other Canadians. And when you throw in the fact that now you have the United States national team in Montreal, they booed the U.S. national anthem. And I don't think that was expected. I didn't expect it. I didn't see any scuttlebutt that might happen. But because of that, the U.S., the players, came out, and within the first 9 seconds of that game, there were 3 fights. And I think that was a product of the fact that, yes, there was a lot of intensity in that game. It was the U.S. national team that had lost to this Canada team in the last Olympics. But they were also pissed that, who the fuck do you think you are that you can boo us during our national anthem?
Right. Yeah, no, it obviously came a week after the tariffs that we imposed. There was a lot going on there. But exactly, you got to set the tone. And, they knew it was game one. They probably assumed they could get to the championship game no matter what. I don't know. They knew they had the best goalie in the world. That must be a good feeling. But, if anyone of your listeners did not see it, I would instantly find a way to go watch that. Not just the highlights, but the entire game. Whatever, if it's on YouTube or wherever it is, go hunt that game down. Go spend a few hours. You can fast forward through everything and probably take you 90 minutes to see everything, 60 to 90 minutes. But it is worth watching again. It was a great spectacle.
Agreed. And I also want to make a comment about Russia. I actually sent a text to our group, the old high school group text that we have about Russia not being a part of the tournament. And, of course, our buddy Mike made the immortal comment, they can't field enough guys with 10 fingers and 10 toes to go out on the ice and actually play hockey.
Right.
And so, that being...
Yes, they can. Yes, they can.
But I think it probably does have something to do with the fact that Russia right now is a pariah state because of the war. It really disappointed me, though, because with as many NHLers that are Russian, and many of the guys that probably could play in the NHL, but because of different financial incentives are playing in Europe or in Russia, they could have fielded a very powerful team. And if you needed one more team to play, because now instead of an even number, you've got an odd number, like you said, you can go get... The Czechs can field enough people. The Germans can field enough people to have a competitive team. The Swiss can field enough people. I felt like it was somewhat limiting to have a 4-team tournament and exclude Russia. And you already came out and said I was going to ask you about that. Did you feel like the tournament was lesser than because, the tournaments that you and I remember back in the mid-'90s, the Russians were always there and the Russians were always a problem?
Yeah, the problem is they just have limited, they're sharing it amongst 2 countries, although not far apart. But, you got a small window where you can play, and it's a physical sport. If this was basketball or baseball or something, it'd be much different. But you're getting the hell kicked out of you. You can only do but so much. It's just hard to, it seems on paper like it would be easy, but it's really not when you're trying to put a certain number of games together in a bracket format to get the best hockey you can get. So that's the other thing. You want to get the best of the best there. So, but yeah, I don't know when they'll have another one of these. That's the thing. I don't know if it's a one-off or what. Obviously, was huge with ratings and things like that. So they should do it again. But obviously the Olympics is next, and then we'll see after that. But yeah, it would have been nice to have more people represented. But still, you can't complain. I mean, it went off the way it should have. Just would have been nice to see the U.S. It's time for them to win one of these things. I'm tired of coming close. We need to be winning these things.
Well, let's talk about that, because in the third period, as you mentioned, of this championship game, in my mind, the U.S. dominated. They dominated where they needed to between the blue lines. I felt like if anyone was going to have any chances, it was going to be the U.S. Then in overtime, like you said, and maybe it was because they had so many good opportunities, but the U.S., Austin Matthews in particular, had two great chances to end that game in overtime. One basically on a one-on-one with Hillenbrook and could not get the puck up high enough over Hillenbrook's pad.
Bennington. Yeah.
Bennington. I'm saying, Bennington. I don't know why I was saying how. That's our goalie. Yeah, and Bennington, it couldn't get him up over the pad. I think Dylan Larkin had a good chance. So as they saw these opportunities mount, it seemed like, and I agree with your assessment, that they started playing a more wide open style. And if you're looking line to line, matchup to matchup, talent to talent, that's not the way you want to play against Team Canada.
No. Jordan Bennington was the MVP of that game, hands down. I mean, say what you want. This tournament was actually not that great for Connor McDavid. The U.S. did great against him. That whole line, Crosby line, they played great. Even the Canadian guys will tell you that the U.S. played great. But when they came out flying around like that, I was so nervous. I was like, please just play boring. Because let's face it, in the first game, that third period was not the most exciting, but it worked. So I was like, just please play like the Florida Panthers, please, in this overtime so we can actually win. And they didn't do it. And, I think they thought that the Jordan Bennington that's sort of been a little bit of a leaky tire this year and in this series was going to show himself again, and it was just the exact opposite. So he just tightened down and was incredible. But still fun to watch. You just hate to see it, And for those who don't play hockey, the game winner, not to give it away, but anytime you're playing hockey and you're in your zone and the puck is thrown around the rink to the other side, you never, ever, ever have two defenders go to the puck, ever. You can do that in the offensive zone. You cannot do that in your zone. Two guys sank and went to the guy in the corner, and he popped it right out to the best player in the world who was 15 feet away and just snapped it right by the goalie. So, it was just a mental error. They hadn't done that pretty much the whole game or the whole week or however long the tournament was. They did it at the worst possible time. Just a mental lapse, and that's what happened.
Yeah, it's funny that you frame it the way that you did. Well, it's not funny because we fucking lost, but it's
we deserve to though for that.
Exactly.
If you do that, look, you deserve it.
It's like football where the number one wide receiver is having this fantastic game, and you think to yourself, okay, they know the defense knows coming into this game that's the other team's number one wide receiver. A, how is he open well enough to continue to get these balls thrown to him? And B, why don't you have a double team? Why don't you have something? Let somebody else beat you besides the guy that you know they're going to be throwing to. And in hockey, it's no different. I mean, when Connor McDavid gets the puck on his stick, and I look around, and there isn't a U.S. player couldn't throw their stick at him and hit him. That's how far away they were. And I was like, well, this is a problem. And he made it look so casual, but that snapshot of his, that is a one or two guys in the league type shot. I mean, there aren't that many guys who have that type of shot that can get it off that quick in the league at any given time. He happens to be one of them.
Yeah, it's like David Pastrnak or Ovechkin. I mean, they're going to bury that thing every time, but you just can't do that. I mean, I don't care if you got to, you got to have the guy's stick tied up. I don't care if you have your back to the puck and you're the American guy or whatever. As long as you got that guy's stick, he's not scoring that goal. I mean, that's hockey 101. We were taught from the time we started, you always in that zone, get his stick. For God's sake, take a penalty if you have to.
Yeah.
But when there's nobody even close, I mean, you can't do that. But you have to wonder in this game, if Matthew Tkachuk had been in there and that line just struck the fear of God, I felt like, into Canada. They had no answer for Brady and Matthew and the whole works. Would that have made a difference? I mean, that grinding style, you have to think that would maybe cause another goal or wear some guys down. And then obviously if you had Charlie McAvoy in there, he's a great shot on the defense. There's just a lot that I think could have happened. There were 3, I thought, definite too many men on the ice penalties on Canada.
Yes.
And the refs never called one of them. And even one of those might have changed the game. So we don't know. But I honestly think the right team won. I mean, their goalie won the game for them. I know Connor McDavid got that shot, but that goalie won the game for him, hands down.
You brought this up, so now I'm going to go into it. Canada, we mentioned this earlier in the podcast, that because of the way Canada brings up its talent and that it's a more fragmented system, that when you put that talent together later on in these players' careers, it is an endeavor. It's more intentional that you have to get these guys to play together. One of the things that just pops off when you think about that, being able to have a coordinated, cohesive team, is line changes. And Canada, throughout the course of the tournament, had poor line changes, not just too many men on the ice, but their line changes cost them goals because guys were completely out of position. They wouldn't have enough men on the ice. There was no doubt in my mind that there were at least 2 different situations where Canada had too many men on the ice. There was one situation that Ray Ferraro, I remember him pointing it out, and he was trying to offer the explanation as to why it didn't technically violate the rule. And I was like, there's motherfuckers everywhere. It looks like half of Canada's team is on the ice at one time. Don't tell me that because people are circling back and they're not touching the puck, that wasn't too many men on the ice. They had too many men on the ice.
You can't let 3 of them go. But, maybe Canada was watching tapes from the Boston Bruins this year on how to change lines. You know what I mean? So maybe that's how they came up with that. But, I mean, it is confusing. And then, the entire USA bench is sitting there calling it out, plain as day. These guys know how to not take a too many men on the ice penalty, right? They've been studying, they've been practicing it up until then. When they see one, the coaches and the players, they know exactly what too many men on the ice is. Whether there's a puck nearby or not, or whoever touched it, they know. The refs didn't do it. But you know what? All in all, clean game. Wasn't a lot of dirty play, which was nice to see. And boy, what about Slavin, the defenseman for the USA? That guy's incredible, huh? And our goalie. So it was promising, but man, I really just wish they had just played the way they played in that third period from the first game in the overtime. It's definitely more fun to watch the way they played that wide open style, but that does not work for our team. Not right now. We don't have the skill to match Canada right now. We're a good team, but we don't have the individual skill.
Well, I'd like to comment on that because I agree. We have a much younger team. Dylan Larkin was not high on the list when this team came out, and I was just happy that he made the team, and then they put him on the ice, and he just exploded. Now, I'm a Dylan Larkin fan, obviously, because he's captain of the Detroit Red Wings, and he's come on in the last 20 games, 30 games, and I did a podcast segment about it after they fired their old coach. They've got a new coach now that I think is utilizing the talent a lot better. He had a great tournament. He had a couple of breakaways that he was very close to scoring goals on. Here's the thing about that team and saying, skill and talent, and they had so many pucks hit the post.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a frustrating part of this tournament, that they had so many guys do so many athletic moves or perform so many athletic moves only to be rewarded with clanging the fucking post. That was frustrating. But, to see these guys, and they're 22 years old, they're 24 years old, they're 26 years old. I mean, you're an old man on the U.S. team if you're 26 years old. And on the other side, you got Sidney fucking Crosby that, what is he? Is he 39?
Yeah, he's going to be playing in the Olympics too.
So
he already said it. So, those guys in Canada, though, those guys are like heroes. That's their sport. They don't have anything else really. So that's, they're going to keep those heroes in play. And how can we argue against it? They're still winning everything.
Yeah, that's true.
Until they start losing, what is, the formula is fine, I think. But, again, it's just, if we could have just played the way we needed to, kept things to the outside, do what we should have done, it would have been fine. But, we may not have quite the skill that Canada does, but that goalie was making some saves that were incredible. Bennington on the other end. I mean, any one of those could have gone in and won it for the USA easily. So,
particularly Austin Matthews. The last thing that I have on my list to talk about, and I hate that this is the case. Austin Matthews was raised here in Scottsdale. He's got a Canadian father. Yeah. He's got an American mother. His father was a very successful NHLer. His father was instrumental, along with a number of other NHLers. Claude Lemieux comes to mind, in bringing hockey not at a professional level, but at a youth level to the desert. There are very nice hockey rinks all over Scottsdale and Tempe, and you think the last place you'd ever find a youth hockey rink is in these areas, but they're there because the money was there.
The money's there, yeah.
That's right. And then you had this groundswell of people start to play here. So Austin Matthews, local boy, goes to Toronto. His record in all tournaments, in overtime game sevens or overtime elimination games, is 0-7. And that includes last night.
Yeah, a lot of people say he doesn't show up for the big game. I don't know about that. I mean, he almost won the thing, but I could tell something was wrong with him. I don't know if he's hurt, if he was sick. He was not. I mean, he didn't even practice a couple of days. So something was off. I mean, he's not going to talk about it, but, man, would that have been something if he won it, though, huh? One of those shots went in?
That's what I wanted. Fine. That's why I'm bringing that up, because he had that open shot where he was coming down basically the middle of the rink, and he got the pass on his stick. It looked good. Granted, he was probably, when he got the puck, 5-6 feet, so he's moving. It has to be fast, and he just didn't get his puck. He didn't get his stick under the puck well enough to get it high enough, right, to beat that right pad save, that kick save from Bennington. I really wanted to see him not only break that spell, but I wanted to see him break the spell for his country, and then see if that couldn't carry him into a more productive playoff in March and April for the Maple Leafs. And it's the exact opposite. Like you said, I think he's hurt, or I think he's playing through some nagging injuries. He wasn't able to win the game. Now he's got this albatross around his neck, 0-7. Yeah,
I mean, a little bit of a curse there. I know about all that, being a Red Sox fan forever, but and a Bruins fan. But the only one thinking more about that missed shot than you or I or this country is him. He's the one that's got to live with that. But all he can do is get on to the next thing. You can't dwell on it. I mean, that's just hockey. The goalie played outstanding. Bennington sort of out of nowhere. I think it probably shocked the USA. No one was more, in shock that those goals didn't go in than our bench,
Yeah.
Compared to how that guy played in the first game, that goalie. So it's just a cool sport that, goalies can get hot and they can change the whole game, but it's kind of a unique sport like that. It's not really like anything else because of that.
Agreed. There's no other sport where you can have one player start playing at such an exceptionally high level, and it can carry a team that really isn't playing nearly as well as that one individual player. It doesn't happen in the NBA. It certainly doesn't happen in the NFL or in Major League Baseball. But we've seen it over and over again in hockey. I think the most recent example would be Carey Price for the Montreal Canadiens, taking them all the way to the Stanley Cup when they were an 8 seed.
Yeah. I mean, this is where hockey, even if you don't like it or you don't understand it, it's far superior to any other major sport because of what we're talking about, is that you just can't have a bracketed sport like this. If you can't do it with football, it won't work. You can't have that many games. Baseball, it would never work. NBA, basketball, you could do it a little bit, but there's no way it's going to hold the excitement, because there's no hitting or anything. So really, hockey for an event like this or an Olympic event, it's on its own pedestal. I think not even close to these other sports. I think it completely dominates, especially from a perspective wise, watching it. It's just so much more intense to me, and then the fact that, obviously people get hurt more, right?
Well, that's true.
I mean, if a guy gets hurt, that changes everything, as you saw in possibly, what happened in the championship game with, what were we down? Four guys aren't right. So, I don't know. I'm frustrated. I felt really good after the first game. I knew we would play Canada again, and I just felt like defensively we would absolutely maul them. So I, just didn't go that way.
No, it didn't. Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast and breaking this down. This is, part of our childhood, us reflecting on the things that were very dear to us from a sports perspective at a very impressionable time. The Canada Cup was a big deal, and it was a big deal when they had it in the 80s. It was a big deal when they brought it back in the 90s, and I'm glad that they did it again. I'd like them to include some more teams. I think you're right. I think from a logistics standpoint, and probably for a player safety standpoint, the NHLPA and the NHL GMs are pretty damn well content to have it 4 teams and have a limited number of games. But I'm hopeful that they're going to do this again in the next 4 years. Do you have any other thoughts to express to my broad and vast audience before we wrap it up?
Well, the only good thing about Canada winning is I am in a cover band of the Tragically Hip called the Wheat Kings out of Canada. And you and I's favorite band is Rush. So that's, we were never big Triumph fans or Bryan Adams fans. But, that's the only thing I can say good coming out of this. But no, the best thing is that I love sports that are when the fan bases are galvanized. We really can't get that in a Super Bowl because it's, 2 cities. A lot of people say, everyone was rooting against Kansas City. But it's better to be rooting for your country. That just feels better. And then all the differences are cast aside and we all can be on one team. But I mean, maybe next time this thing grows to a viewership of 20 million people. Who knows? But this sets the stage for a very, very, very popular Olympics. And I think, potentially these 2 teams could be right back in the mix for the gold medal. Who knows?
Agreed. Well, I appreciate you coming on, man. And we'll have to do it again for a preview of the Stanley Cup playoffs.
All right, let's do it.
Act 2, Epilogue.
I didn't think I was going to be able to do a podcast segment on the 4 Nations face-off hockey tournament because of the timing. The championship game was on a Thursday. Thankfully, I was able to schedule this with John on a Friday and get it published on a Saturday. I have 2 or 3 other segments in the hopper that I was going to publish for this week, so I'm going to save those for next week. If you're looking for a preview, it's a discussion of checks and balances. Having powerful entities, powerful governmental or bureaucratic corporate structures being checked by other power structures. This is not as unique a time in this country's history as the media or as these political pundits or the politicians themselves want to lead us to believe. We've faced these types of obstacles these types of circumstances before. And in order to check powerful entities, powerful people, you often have to cede power to people that you may not particularly trust, but you trust them more than the current institutionalized power structures. Hopefully that wets your whistle to come back next week and see how I dissect that. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.